Good evening, everyone. I'm Andrew Davidson, one of the committee members of C20 Cymru. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I'd like to mention our organised trip to Swansea, which should be an excellent event. It was taking place on the weekend, throughout the weekend of Friday, 21st of April, and details can be found on the C20 website. On to tonight's talk, and I'm delighted to welcome Liz Parfitt, archivist at Conway Archive Service. She's going to be looking in particular at the records that Conway Archives keep, which relate to the work of Herbert Lucknorth within the county of Conway. We are, of course, also fortunate to have the excellent biography by Adam Voilker to refer to. And Adam, I believe, is in the audience. Liz has been an archivist at Conway Archive Service for the past 18 months, having previously done project work for Conway, Denbighshire and Gwynedd Archives, and for the Llangollen International Musical Eisteddfod. Prior to becoming an archivist, Liz had various other jobs, including that of a volcanologist, which I'm not quite sure how the two match one another, but it does sound good, I must admit. You'll be able to ask questions at the end by clicking on the Q&A button. I'll now hand over to Liz to start her talk. Thanks very much, Liz.
Thank you for that introduction, Andrew, and welcome to everyone. I can't see you, but welcome to you all. So, as Andrew said, I'm an archivist now at Conway Archives. So I was really delighted to, oh gosh, hang on, I've messed things up already. Sorry, Andrew, complete cock up. What have I done? Oh. Sorry, I'll have to redo the screen sharing. I apologise. Technology. Where's it gone? Oh dear, I can't see my screen now. Can you see the screen, Andrew? Sorry, I can't.
No, it just says Zoom.
Yeah,
it's white.
That's all I can see as well.
White rectangles. Yeah, okay, you're halfway there. I wonder if the box that you created shifted over. That is possible. So at the moment we've got the open presentation.
Okay, right. Let's try that again then.
Showing half the screen.
Okay.
Or at least half the slide that you want to present.
Zoom slideshow.
Yep, that looks about right.
Nearly there.
We're looking at a picture of Adam's biography at the moment, Adam's book on North.
I've got my notes. That's the only thing I haven't got. Right, are we back?
Yep.
Thank you. That's a wonderful way to start. I do apologise. Right, I won't press anything too much. So, as I was saying, I was absolutely delighted to be invited to give the talk because, in my very, very amateurish way, I'm quite interested in architecture, and I've been aware of Herbert Lucknorth's work in North Wales pretty much since I moved to North Wales about 20 years ago. Preparing for the talk has given me excuse to sort of both get all our collection material out and have a look at it, or in fact get my colleagues to digitize it. Thank you to them. But also I decided what I'd do was use this as an excuse to get out and about, drive around the county and look at some of these buildings and take some photos so I could show them to you alongside some of our collection material. So there's a few sort of caveats before I get into the talk proper. Quite clearly, I'm not an expert in architecture, nor do I know a massive amount about the arts and crafts movement. So I'm delighted that Adam Folker is here. I used his book a great deal in the talk, and also the Pevenson's Guide, Building the Wales Guide, for a lot of my information in the talk. Obviously, anything that I get wrong is my own fault. So I'm sure most of you listening know a great deal more about both architecture and the arts and crafts movement than I do, so I'm not going to say a massive amount about it. But when I was discussing this with my son, he said he didn't know what the arts and crafts movement was, and maybe I should say something about it. So with my very limited knowledge, my understanding of the arts and crafts movement is that the period it covers is typically about 1880 to sort of 1920, and that it was a movement in the art world, but across all sorts of arts, including architecture, which was a bit of a kind of backlash to industrialization and mass production of materials. And so it was a sort of return to craftsmanship and quality work. And Herbert Lucknorth, as Adam's describing here, is sort of that arts and crafts architecture in Wales. He's very much part of that movement. Before he set up in his own practice in North Wales, he'd worked with Sir Abraham Lutyens and Henry Wilson in particular, who were a big part of that arts and crafts movement. So I'm not going to say very much about Herbert Lucknorth, the man, at all. We're going to just look at some of his work. But just in brief, he was actually born in Leicester, but he moved to Llanfabecon on the North Wales coast as a boy because his grandfather had bought a lot of property in the 1850s in that area and had also moved up there. And he was obviously interested in architecture from quite a young age, and having sort of relocated to North Wales, became quite interested in the architecture of the old churches and old cottages of Snowdonia, and published these books. These are copies that we have in our reference collection at the archive, and this has seemed to have influenced quite a lot of his work. So my sort of aim in giving the talk is very much about giving people who are not really acquainted with Herbert Lucknorth's work an idea of some of these wonderful buildings that are out there, and so I've sort of tried to combine, as I said, looking at some of the material that we hold in the collections with some of my photographs and things that I've taken in my ramblings to go and look at these buildings myself. So because I'm kind of focused the talk around things that we hold in our archive collection, which is a lot bigger than what I can talk about in the talk here. We have quite a lot of material, but that does inherently sort of place limits on the scope of the talk, because it's limited to the sort of material we've got in the archives. So, for instance, Herbert Lucknorth did a lot of work with church architecture and things. We don't have anything about that in the archives, so I won't be talking about that. Also, the material we have very little about the interior design of we have layouts, but not the interior design of his properties, which I know are wonderful, but we don't have any material about that. So I will largely not be touching that. So you've had all the caveats there. Let's actually get on with what I am going to talk about. So first off, I thought maybe we should have a little bit of orientation. I can't assume that you all know exactly where either Conway or Llanfabecon are, or indeed Conway County. So Conway Archives is actually based in the town of Conway. This is our new building here. It's just outside the town walls. But the county of Conway is this area I've shown on the Google Maps here, so it was quite a big area. So something that it does have a bearing on what's to come. Conway was actually created as a county back in 1996 out of parts of what were the historic counties of Carnarvonshire and in the west, and Denbighshire in the east. And that has affected the records that have come down to us for complicated reasons. So basically, all the material that I'm going to talk about today came from what was historically Carnarvonshire. Now, it's not a massive problem because most of the buildings that Herbert North created, which are in what's now the county of Conway, were in the western half of the county anyway. But there are a few properties that he built over Colwyn Bay, Abergele. We wouldn't have any records for those if they've survived. They would be over in North East Wales Archive in Ruthin. So that's just to explain the background to that. Okay, so I've done a sort of more detailed location map. This is by no means all the properties that we have material on or that Herbert North built in Conway area. These are just locations of properties that I'm going to talk about today. So again, a bit more orientation. Here's Conway again. Over here, this is Llanfyddwchan, where Herbert North lived and worked, and some of his most sort of celebrated properties are particularly an area called the Close, that we'll talk about later. But other properties we're going to look at are a series of buildings in over in Deganwy, over here. We'll talk about one up here on the Great Orme, and then there's a string of buildings down the Conway Valley that we're going to look at as well. So I should start by talking about what sort of material we've actually got in our archive collection. The bulk of the material, not all of it, but the bulk of the material is actually in probably 4 collections. The last one, this uncatalogued material, we've only acquired quite recently, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end. The other 3 main collections have these catchy archival kind of names, or CMP, stands for Maps and Plans, doesn't matter, 23, 75 and 99. And as you can see, they're all building control plans for different council areas in the precursor councils. That's why it's spelt like this, because that's the old spelling that was the councils were called. So Conway Borough Council, Conway Rural District Council, and Llanfyddwchan Urban District Council. So these are all records that would have been created as part of the sort of planning process. So they're building control plans and sort of planning documents. And these all came to us when the county was created in '96. Many of the records that have come from the precursor councils came directly to us then. So all of these came to us at that time. So just to give you kind of idea of what these records consist of, the bulk of what I'm going to talk about is our lovely building control plans. Some of them really are quite lovely. So these are the views of the buildings, the plan view, various different angles of the building that would have been submitted as part of the planning process. So that's what I'm going to use primarily, but most of these building control plans, a lot of them, have other documentation associated with them. So you can see here we've got a couple of different types of official forms, should we say. So this one was for the Borough Engineers of Conway. So this would have details about what they were going to build, who the building was being built for, where it was going to be built, etc. But there's often in the collection quite a lot of correspondence back and forth as well to do with the building. So for instance, this is a letter signed by Herbert North about a building in Vardra Park, we'll talk about later. It was like this because it's like his phone number, you can see here, his phone number is Llanfyddwchan 4, which just makes me laugh. Anyway, so I'm not going to talk about most of this additional material, but just to say that there is a lot of material in the collection that I just simply can't cover in the talk, but we're mostly going to look at these plans. So I thought we'd start where I started with Herbert North. This is a building called the Church Institute in Llanfyddwchan. It was built in 1912. It's an extraordinary building. We have the plan for this one. And I first encountered this building many years ago. My son, when he was young, did drama classes in Llanfyddwchan, and he used to be in a different building in town. But on one occasion, they were held in this building, I'd never seen it before. And I went up to fetch him. I was like, what is this building? This is extraordinary. What's it doing in this Welsh mountain village? And obviously got to go inside as well. It's got this fantastic interior. It was just like this strange magical world, as if it was from a children's book from the 1930s or something. So this is where it first sparked my interest in his work. And it's a good place to start because there are many aspects of this building that are really characteristic of his work, as you'll see as we go through. So his designs, they're very characterized by these long, steeply pitched roofs with slates on them. As you can see, quite often what they do is they start steep and then shallow out towards the bottom. Another characteristic are these narrow, tall windows. It's got this rather quirky spire. We'll see another one of those in a minute. We had a thing about chimneys, but we'll come to them later. And also the buildings rendered in this rough cast, so most of them are white buildings. So that's my starting point. I'll just show you the plan. So the plans are typically like this, so they'll have different elevations, or I don't know all the proper terms for this. Your location map, and then a plan view showing how the building is inside, that sort of thing. Okay, so I've sort of divided my attention in the talk into sort of four, can't count, different areas. So I'm going to start off by talking about some work that we have plans and things for that are to do with schools and institutions that Herbert Lucknoth worked on. I'm going to talk a little bit about St Winifred's School, which I'm sure a lot of you know about, which is a sort of lost treasure. And I'm going to look at various domestic work. A lot of the work that he did was on quite modest scale houses. And then we're gradually going to work ourselves to the Close, which is a sort of estate of houses in Clanmaveckan, which is a real sort of gem of his work. So we'll start off with the schools. So we have a lot of plans from Herbert Lucknoth, which are to do with work he did for various schools in what's now Conway. So there's actually 5 schools here, 2 schools. So these 4 schools, he didn't design these buildings, but he did a lot of work on alterations and things to them. So I'm not going to talk about them in any great detail because what we're more interested in here, I think, is his actual design. I am going to briefly mention the infant school in a minute for reasons that personally amuse me, as you'll find out. But then I'm going to look at Guffin National School, which is the one of these buildings that he did design from scratch and is very typical of his work. So let me start with the Conway National Schools. Again, the spelling is the original spelling. That's why I haven't corrected it here to modern spelling. So there are 2 school buildings, not schools now, on Rosehill Street, right in the middle of Conway on the one-way system, as you can see. This one was for a long time the boys' school and is now, I think, the parish hall. And the other one is this, which was the infant school, which is now called Conway Visitor Centre. It's actually a shop. And it's this one that I'm just going to tell you a little anecdote about. So we have plans for the alteration of Conway National School in 1902. I just put this in because it amused me, and also it shows that as well as designing all those glorious buildings, Herbert Lucknoth did some less glamorous work as well. So in this case, I've blown up what it says here at the top of the plan, and it says, bear with me, plan of new WCs and urinal, and also a coal house and dustbins for the infant school in Conway. Not very exciting, you wouldn't think. But then I looked at this plan and I looked at this feature here. What on earth is going on here? Why have we got this strange shaped building? If I blow it up, so this is the new toilets and urinals. This is girls' toilets here, boys' toilets there, urinals there. What is going on? Why has he built a building like that? Now, some of you are probably well ahead of me here if you know Conway well. Conway has these town walls. Our archive is now where that building used to be, so I look out on these every single day. And these towers along the walls are actually, they're not full towers, they're sort of fake half towers. Can you see where I'm going with this? So when I looked at the plan in more detail, blew it up, this is a section of the plan, this is the back of the school here. This section here, that is the town wall, and what it says here is UWC's in Old Tower. This is Google Maps view of this now. This is the back of the school building, so that wall there is that wall there, just as it is today. So what he's done is obviously looked at this. This school has not got much space between itself and the town walls, so he's just used the unoccupied space of the old 13th century tower and turned it into the toilets, which I just thought was wonderful. It's just me. Excuse me. Right, so moving on to buildings that Herbert North actually designed. The first one we're going to look at is Guffin National School. For those of you not familiar with the area, Guffin is basically an area just outside Conway's town walls, just to the south of the town walls. And this is Guffin National School, which was built in 1903-04. Very characteristic. You can probably see the similarities to the Church Institute straight away. This was built as a new school to deal with growing population and overflow in the other school buildings. So it was a school for a long time. Then it was a community centre, and then finally it was sold off, and it is now a very fancy holiday let. This is their fence line here, so I had to sort of sneak in and take a picture. But anyway. So it's got many of the sort of classic features of a Herbert North building. It's got your lovely slate roof with a changing angle on it. It's got this beautiful patterning, which is quite common on some of his buildings, where he's used slates of different colours to make a pattern in the roof. It's got a fairly funky chimney. It's got the spire, it's reminiscent of that one we saw on the Church Institute. We've got the tall, narrow windows, and we've got the rough cast as well on the wall. So it's a pretty archetypal building. And again, we've got these plans for it. I'm not going to talk about them in any detail, but just to give you a feel for these lovely things, lovely objects. They're all sort of hand drawn, hand painted. Okay, so moving on from that happy survival to a rather sadder story. There was another school that Herbert North worked on. He didn't design all of it, but he designed a lot of it, and it was a school called St Winifred's School in Llanfyddwchan. And the pictures I'm using here are partly from a sort of reference book that we have about St Winifred's School, and also some postcards that we have in our collections. We'll start off on the left here, and this is Llanfyddwchan here. There's the coastline there. Over here is like the Menai Straits and Anglesey. And if you look carefully, you can see a rather extraordinary looking building down here. So the close we're going to talk about later, the estate that he developed, will be just to the south, up the hill here. So blown up that building here, but it still looks extraordinary. This is this building here, which is the chapel that Herbert North designed for St Winifred's School. And I've got an image of the interior of this as well. As well as the chapel, he built a whole bunch of classroom blocks. So this is the back of the chapel here, and here's some of the classrooms, and they're all very much in his style. The sad thing is, so this chapel must have been such an obvious landmark in that area of people driving along the coast road. It's now the A55 expressway. It must have been a really obvious landmark. But sadly, in late 60s, the school went bust, and the land that the school occupies, quite a big area, was sold off to developers. And as I understand it, the buildings were just in 1970 unceremoniously flattened. This is a picture I've got off the internet. showing the chapel, and then showing basically the rubble afterwards. It's a very sad, and I found utterly bewildering that this building could have just been knocked down like that. We went through some of the local newspapers that we have, thinking we find something about it in there, and there just doesn't seem to be any information about people protesting or anything at all about the building. It's just gone. It just lives on. This is the housing estate, or part of the housing estate that was built. The name St Winifred's lives on in one of the streets there. So it's a very sad to think of such a fascinating building, unusual building, the chapel in particular, just being destroyed by that. But luckily, most of his buildings have actually survived, and we can go and look at them. Move on. So we talked about schools. There's one other kind of institutional building that I was going to talk about, and that is a building down here up the Conway Valley, and it is a place called Caerhune. This is Caerhune Parish Hall, which was built in 1902, and it is so it was built as a parish hall, but it was later sold off. It's now a private house. Again, we've got the plans for this. We'll look in detail at this in a minute. And it's got I'm going to talk as well about this funny little building at the back as well in a second. So if we compare the current building with the original plan, you can see that it's not unaltered, but a lot of the features are still there. Here's a octagonal window. It's the original design. They've blocked off some of the very tall windows, but they're still there. They've obviously put in a new doorway at some point here. The old door is actually on the side there. But again, it's a sort of quintessential Herbert Lucknorth building. You see lovely patterning in the roof, this very steep roof lines, this interesting intersection of these roofs. One of the things I really liked about this building is that funny little building as well that I pointed out on the plan. So here's the parish hall. There's the boundary wall that runs up here, which is here in the diagram. That little building there is triangular, which I just thought was wonderful anyway. How often do you see a triangular building? And this window here is that window there. And this was the coal store for the parish hall. What I love about it, and maybe it's in keeping with that whole arts and crafts thing, is that even though this is just a very basic functional building to keep the coal, they've still put that effort into the design of it. And if you see here, they've gone to the trouble of keeping that patterning that you see in the slates on the main building. They've gone to the trouble of putting that on this humble little triangular coal store, which I just think is wonderful. Okay, so now we're going to move on and look at domestic buildings for the rest of the talk. And I'm just going to show you, I say, a selection. We have far more plans than I can possibly show you here. So we're going to look at various places and then gradually hone in on the close. So the first one I'm going to show you is a building which is kind of in the middle of nowhere above Tanner Cavern here. And this is the building. This one, when I was out and about driving, was very tricky to find. It's on a tiny little back road, so I was pleased to find it. It's a very humble building. It's the smallest of his buildings that we have plans for. It is very much altered. It's got this enormous flat roof extension wrapping around it, but you can still see the basic design here compared with our plans. You can see the characteristic strange chimney. Well, it's not the same as the original chimney. Maybe changed in design at some point. Not quite sure what this building was designed for, because it says on the plan here that it was built for Dr. Clifton Hughes of Clammerbecken, but I don't think it was for his use. I wonder if it was for an agricultural labour or something like that. It's very, very small, which is probably why they built the enormous flat roofed extension. It's got two little bedrooms upstairs in that roof. The whole downstairs is just a kitchen, a scullery and a dairy. So, you know, it wasn't a place to go and sort of lounge around of an evening or whatever. And I say it's absolutely tiny. So moving on, our next building is in Conway. It's literally a few hundred yards from the archives, and I must have driven past this building hundreds of times. This is the Sutton Pass Road that comes down, and Conway's just over here, the main part. It's right on the corner. I've driven past this and not really kind of registered this property at all. But it's a semi-detached house. For some reason, it was designed quite early on, but not built till 1919. And it's again got many of the characteristic features of a Herbert Lock North house, and is largely unaltered. You can see in the plan here the funky chimney, which is the same as it is now. We've got our classic sloping roof with a change in slope angle. These complicated junctions of the gables the right word. So another interesting property. The next one I'm going to talk about is the only one that we don't actually have plans for, but I've put it in because it's an unusual building, and it's this one over here on the Great Orme, and it's actually it's a house called Bronner Moor on the West Shore. It's actually on a street called Helig Drive. That's what its proper name is. It's known to anyone locally as Millionaires Row because it's where all the big houses are, where people with lots of money live. But I put this one in because it was designed by Herbert Lock North. The plans were designed and given as a wedding present to a guy called Frank Tilsley, who was a builder who worked a lot with Herbert Lock North. And I put it in because, and thanks to my colleague actually went up and took this photo for me as I didn't have time. But it's you can see there's characteristics of the other buildings, but it's got this really unusual style. I think this is called a butterfly plan building, so it's sort of symmetric around an axis like this. And I believe, I haven't actually been up there to see this yet, but I believe it's quite similar in design to the house that Herbert Lock North actually designed and lived in Llanfairpwllgwyngyllgogerychwyrndrobwllllantysiliogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogo course, to do with it. Okay, so moving right along. So we've been up on the Great Orme. Now we're going to come back into Ganwy, and there's a development here which a whole bunch of different architects worked on, sort of housing estate called Vardra Park. But it runs along right by the main road between Ganwy and Llandudno. So again, I must have driven past this many times, taking my son to school. And you sort of see something but don't really think about it. And there's a string of 5 houses here in a row, which were all designed by Herbert North, built in the 1930s. And again, we've got plans. We've got a lot of plans actually for Vardra Park, both his buildings and other people's. This is one of the plans that we have, and it says it's designed for numbers 3 and 5 Vardra Park. Those numbers are not the numbers any longer. These are all in the 30s, I think now, the numbers of them. But basically, they built 2 houses for essentially the same, a couple of doors down from each other. And they're still there now. There they are. So you can see, if you look at the plan, it's beautiful. You can see that quirky chimney is exactly the same now as it was when it was designed. And again, it's a building with a lot of characteristic Herbert North features. The chimney being a big one. Point on the windows here is another one, and this lovely slate roof. Okay. So there's one other property I want to show you before we head over towards Llanfyddachan, and that's an extraordinary building, very close to Talcafon, the Conway Valley, and this building is right by the main A470 road near the Talcafon pub, but it's the most extraordinary building. It's called Penrith Lodge, and it was built as a lodge building to a big hall in the back there, Penrith Hall. And this is it in person. The road literally goes through the building. Doesn't that look like something out of a fairy tale or something? It's quite funny. While I was there taking a photo, the current owner of the building, he's apparently only just bought it, came out. I thought, oh no, a bit of trouble here. He might not like me taking pictures of his house. But no, he couldn't have been nicer. And he came over and I explained who it was and what we were doing, and he was very enthusiastic about the building. And he'd lived in a previously lived in a Herbert Luck North building in Bangor, as it happened. He was absolutely lovely, and he said, would you like some pictures of the interior that we were doing up? Some of the original features are still there. So yeah, that'd be great. So he took my email, and he did actually email me today with the photographs. So I've just put a couple of them in here to show you what this building looks like inside. And particularly interesting is this tower here has a staircase in it. Anyway, so these are like fresh off the press. So certainly this one, which shows some of the interior doors, are all metal and glass doorways that are in there. The most lovely ones are of that turret. You see these typical kind of narrow, tall windows. I suppose they're a bit like arrow slits, and this sort of spiral staircase going down there with this absolutely beautiful banister rail going down. So he's going to send me some more pictures, and hopefully I'll go back and have a look at it at some point. But anyway, that was a lovely part of being out there. So finally, we're going to leave the rest of Conway behind, and we're going to head over to Llanfairpwllgwyngyllgogery at last. And I'm going to start off by looking at a couple of properties right down on the seafront here. There's a few Herbert Luck North properties along the seafront. I'm just going to talk about these two. Again, I must have walked past them hundreds of times. Hundreds of people must go past here every day walking their dogs or just going for a bit of a blow. And it faces straight onto the sea. As you can see here, it says elevation to the sea. This is a semi-detached property. It's quite an early one, but 1906. And again, we have the plans for it. And you can see that it's not much altered. They've done something to the chimneys. They're not funky any longer. But beyond that, we've got a lot of characteristic features. The roof with the changing angle on it, the rough cast. You can see, hopefully, you can make out that there's the patterning in the slate tiling on the roof, and these interesting gables. And I've circled here. This you barely make it out, but there's a QR code on the fence here. If I just draw attention to that. So this isn't the same QR code, obviously, but that's what it looks like. And they are history points QR codes. And if you've got your smartphone, you can get it to read the QR code, and it will take you straight to a page on their website, which will tell you about the property that the QR code's attached to. And in Llanfairpwllgwyngyllgogery itself, they've actually created a whole kind of walking tour, which I've highlighted here, just to look at Herbert Luck North's work. So I actually did this the other day with a friend of mine, and we walked around, did the tour, and went around looking at all the QR codes. So it's a really fun thing to do, and I thought I'd just draw attention to that if you fancy getting out about in Llanfairpwllgwyngyllgogery and finding out a little bit more. Okay, so moving on, so we're drawing ever closer to the close, which is this lovely estate of his, but just around the corner on Park Road. This is one of the earliest buildings that Herbert Luck North designed in Llanfairpwllgwyngyllgogery. This is Northcott. It's built in 1899-ish. Excuse me. It's interesting, this one and the next one I'm going to show you, in that it has some characteristic features of his later buildings, and in other ways they're different. So similarities here, we've got the kind of pointed arch on both the porch and the door here, that being very much favoured. We've got the tall, narrow windows. We've got these complicated intersections of the roofs. So that's all fairly standard fare. But one of the glaring differences here is that we can actually see the stone that this building's built from. It's not had the render put on it. Just around the corner from there, we finally get to the close. And the close, like I say, is this it's like an estate within the village of Clanbecan. And the first building that was put up as part of the close is this building. It's called Bolnhurst. It was built in 1898, so right around the same time as the one I just showed you. And it's interesting in that it's really atypical of all the other buildings in the close. And it has some features that are very similar, but certain things that are very different. So one of the big differences here is that it's got this unusual window. I believe this is called an eyebrow dormer. And it's got a curvature to the window here and to this window here. You don't see that on any of these later buildings. We will see the circular window later on. Again, the archway here, instead of being that pointed arch that we actually saw on Northcote, this one's got a rounded top to it, which is unusual. But we have got the classic, slightly bizarre chimney. We've got the long slate roof. So there are, and we've got the rough cast on here as well. So there are things about this building that are similar to many of these other buildings, but there are strangenesses. So if you kind of turn around from there and start walking up the close, as I did the other day, you start to see lots of these buildings. Everywhere you look, there's buildings in this particular kind of arts and crafts style. First time I went there, which is after I discovered the Church Institute, I was like, what is this place? This is so strange. Seemed completely out of keeping in this otherwise very typical Welsh village. And the impression I had walking around for the first time was like, wow, this is like a 1920s housing estate. You know, it's like a housing estate, but they've done it really nicely. These are lovely buildings. And it wasn't until fairly recently that I realised that these were not put up in a short period of time, but actually the estate was built piecemeal with buildings filling in left, right and centre over a period of about 40 years. But the reason it looks like one coherent whole is that after that sort of initial period, like the Bolnhurst house that I showed you, Herbert Lucknall's style seems to have just sort of settled, and there's not massive differences in style between the earliest houses in the close and the later ones. And so although they were built over a length of time, there's this coherence to the whole. So I thought I'd show you, just demonstrate this by showing you some houses built through different stages of development of the close. So this is Beamsmoor. It was built in 1912, so relatively early. And it's got some classic Herbert Lucknall things. We've got the roof with a changing slope. We've got the tall, thin windows, beautiful long slate roofs, the rough cast. So it's 1912. I'll show you another one. This is Brooklands. It was built in 1922. Again, no massive difference in style. The windows are very similar. We've got the roof with a change in angles. This one's kept its canted downpipe, which is a slightly unfortunate feature that a lot of the buildings have got rid of since. We've got the interesting intersection of roof bits. We've got the pointed arches, all very familiar. And then we'll move on to one of the last ones. This is Dwyfor, built in 1937. And again, you can see it's got the same DNA. And this one's the one that's got that circular window that harks right back to Bolnhurst, that first building. But you can see the coherence of this design here all the way through. So we don't have that many plans of the buildings actually in the close. A heck of a lot of the plans for those houses are held by the Royal Commission on Ancient and Historic Monuments Wales in Aberystwyth, and Adam's book uses a lot of those plans in that book. But we do have a few plans for the house and the close of our own. So I put a couple of those in, and this is one of them. And this is for a property that was at the time was just called New Cottage Next Woodcott, Clanwilliam, and that's how it's catalogued in our collections, because that's what it was called on the plan. So some of what been doing as a result of going out and looking at these buildings is actually trying to go back and look at our catalogue and actually add in some of the names of these buildings subsequently had to make the catalogue more kind of usable. If you were looking for plans for this particular property, you're not going to find it under that name. So it's been quite a good prompt to re-investigate some of the cataloguing. And in this particular case, I was able to identify which property this was. So this is a house called Willome, and it's next door to what used to be Woodcott, but that's not called that anymore. It's called Tincoed now, apparently. But you can see this is the same. This is the same property, and it's got all those characteristic features. Then we've got another property. It's another plan that we have, and this property has the glamorous name of New Cottage in Field, Clanwilliam. And this one I'm slightly puzzled by, and I'm sure someone out there from Clanwilliam will know exactly what property this is. But it seems to be a mirror image of a property we do have plans for called Nairth Wen, but I haven't worked out which one this actually is. Okay, so also good. So I talked about the catalogue material that we have. As I said, there's a lot more of that than I can possibly talk about in a talk like this. We do have some uncatalogued material that I didn't know about until a few days before Christmas. And this has come from a collection that was deposited a few months ago. And it's called the David T. Jones Collection. And it was brought in by one of our volunteers on behalf of David Jones's family. David apparently died relatively recently and was, I didn't know him, but he was very interested in the history of Clanwilliam and had quite a lot of material about it, which is now being donated to us. But because it's quite a big collection, we haven't yet had a chance to go through it and catalogue it. So I didn't know this existed, basically. But one of those strange bits of sort of serendipity, Max, the volunteer who brought the collection in, was in the search room one day and overheard a conversation between two of my colleagues about me preparing for this talk. And he just piped up and said, "I'm sure there's some Herbert Luck North stuff in that collection, you know." So I ran into him at our Christmas tea and cake session and dragged him away from his cake, took him down to the strong room and got him to show me. So we were able to pull these materials out. My colleagues have very kindly photographed and scanned the material, and I only actually got to see it in the last few days. So the material that's in that collection that will get catalogued properly eventually are a bunch of plans for number 25, the close, which is a property called Nairth Wen, which I have been to see. There's material about cottage at Newry, and Newry's property that is way up above the close on the very top of the village, which is now called Plas Haylog and has some very interesting buildings apparently, but I haven't got to see those yet. And then there's also quite a lot of plans for alterations to a house called Bryn Derwent, so they're all in Clanwilliam. So this is material we've only just started to look at. So just to give you a feel for that, so this is Nairth Wen, and this is one of the plans that we have for it. A lot of material in this collection has notes and things attached to it. I think Dave Jones must have used it in an exhibition at some point. So like I say, we're just starting to kind of look through that stuff, and we'll be getting around to cataloguing that in the near future. So that is largely what I wanted to say today. My intention was to try and really give an impression of this wonderful buildings that are out there, inspire you to go out and take a look at them, and of course acquaint you with the fact that we do have these big archive collections. Anyone can come into the archive and take a look and do some more research with these plans. We very much welcome that. So thank you for listening, really, and that's it.
Okay, thanks for that, Liz. That was excellent and extremely enjoyable. A good whiz round, all of them, and really good to know what Conway archives hold in respect to North. Okay, sorry, I keep jumping around. There are a number of questions, both in the Q&A and some hidden within the chat as well. We can try and go through the chat ones. Q&A ones are easier to deal with. We'll deal with those first, if that's okay with you. So in terms of local archiving, what information would be useful to send in from interested people like us in the talk? So what sort of material would you want in the archives?
As I said, most of the material we have is sort of building control plans. There's a lot of information there associated with it to do with.
But if people have got material of their own that they feel that I might like to donate, what sort of?
Oh well, we always welcome that. Sorry, I misunderstood the question. Yes, if you have material that you'd like to donate, we are always delighted to look at it. And to do that, you can just pop in and see us. You can email us. You can phone us up and to talk about it. So any number of ways of getting in touch with us. We've got a website. So if you did a sort of Google search for Conway Archive Service, you'd find us there. In fact, I could probably put the address in the chat, couldn't I, if I was really sophisticated and could figure out how to do it. I'll put our main. Just posted. That's our
yeah. Okay. Well done.
Inquiry email address there.
Yep.
So,
thanks very much.
Well,
Sean is
to take materials, but you know, we very much welcome interest in donating.
Sean's asking that they've got a house in Dolwyn Allen.
Yes.
Called Llwys Gwynt. Do you know if you've got any records for that particular house?
I'm almost certain that we do have some plans for a house in Dolwyn Allen that he designed. And the reason I didn't include it was that I simply ran out of time to get quite that far down the Conway Valley. But having been out and about looking at the properties, I'm now really keen to carry that on. And go and see some others and add the photographs and things that I've taken, albeit not wonderful, are going to get added to our digital collections as well. Now we've gone to the trouble of doing it. Yes, there's a fair chance we do have something to do with that particular property, if that's one of the Herbert Langlois properties. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. Okay, good.
I'd have to look on our catalogue to be sure. The other way that you can check is to have a look on our catalogue. And actually the best way to access the catalogue to see just about anything that's in our archive is to go to a site called just if you Google that, it comes up. Archives Hub is a sort of central clearinghouse for archives across the whole UK. And if you do a search in there, Conway's collections are in there as well.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Mike Padmore, in terms of construction, was it a lime or a cement render for his rough cast?
I have no idea.
I don't know either, and I've not. There might be. Would you? I mean, actually, that information might be in your records somewhere. Mightn't it? It's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's some of the. So we've got so much material that I've looked at the plans, but I didn't actually have the time to look at a lot of the records and the correspondence. But I know I saw one of the letters that Herbert Locknorth had written, and just even on the end of the letter there was little drawings that he'd done about how the bricks were to be laid out and things like that. So it's definitely worth coming in and you know, looking at.
Yeah, and having a look. Yeah, it's possible that Adam knows as well. I'm just trying to get to the top of there's a terrific amount. There's some amazing stuff in the chat box. A lot of the questions have been answered by Andrew Hinchcliffe, and thanks very much for that. It's extremely useful. Oops. So I won't go through those. And I think one of the main ones is answered in that the talk will be put on to our YouTube website afterwards, once it's been processed.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll flag that up on our social media when that happens as well.
Yep. Yeah, I can't. So as regards any actual questions within the chat box, I think most of them have been dealt with actually within the chat. I can't find anything there within that. Adam, okay, yeah. He'd like to contact a couple of people. If possible, but that's not directly relevant. Okay, I don't think, unless if somebody's put something into chat that they really want an answer to, can you put it into the Q&A, please? And that will enable me to find it. But I think pretty much everything else has been dealt with now. Yeah, there's one interesting one there. Someone, I think that's Andrew again. Andrew Hinchcliffe. He's got some old pictures of the house there, which could be interesting. The gatehouse. I'm not sure if it was a gatehouse, but the arched building,
Yes.
which you drove through. Was that going anywhere specific?
It goes up to Penrith Hall at the back, which I think the hall has nothing particular to do with Herbert Locknorth, I think, but the lodge was built later. So the road doesn't actually go anywhere, and I haven't actually been up there. Apparently there's a lot of CCTV around it. But the lodge itself, you can see it's literally just off the A470. It's just most of us are driving up there so fast you wouldn't notice it, but the lodge is on, if you were going up from, say, Glen Conway up towards Battersea Coed, it's on your left just before you get to the Tower Cavern turn off.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, okay.
Extraordinary.
Greg Stevenson's asking, he says, I understand that Werners Hub is open once a year. Is it a set date? How would one go about actually visiting the property?
I don't know. I haven't got to visit myself. I'd like to know myself. If there's anyone out there who can answer that.
I'll keep an eye on that. I'm not sure either as to whether it gets advertised in advance or not. Any north houses in Penmawr?
I think someone's answered that, suggesting that they think there is. I don't know of any. We certainly didn't have any plans for any. But I think someone's put in suggesting there's some on Boyle Road. So to go and have a better look at that. But we certainly don't have any plans for any in Benham.
Yeah, okay, fine. Right. Right. It looks as though that's about it, I think. Well, thanks very much again, Liz.
At all. It's been a lovely excuse to get out
Yeah.
and see lots of lovely buildings.
Good, excellent. Okay then. Well, yeah, I certainly thoroughly enjoyed it. And
If anyone could think of any questions, after the event,
yeah, they can contact you at the archives, can't they?
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No problem at
Yeah.
all.